Good evening, everybody, and welcome along to this Farm Advisory Service webinar on trouble in the team managing conflict. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Hopefully you're all able to hear and see me okay, but if anybody is having any technical issues, then there is the chat function, hopefully in your panel on one side. By all means, if there's any issues, type them in there and we'll see if we can't help you. So this is the third in a series of 4 webinars on the theme of managing people. But before we get going tonight, we're just going to ask you to take part in a very quick poll so we can get an idea of who our audience is this evening. Thank you all for taking part in that poll there. So we can see that we're mainly joined by farmers or farm managers. That's 71% of us. It's great to see some employees along tonight in the 12%, and as well as some students and industry professionals. So welcome to you all. Tonight we are joined by Shan Bushell from Shan Bushell Associates, and Shan was a dairy farmer until 2004, and 2 years later she travelled to Australia to be trained in family business meeting facilitation, and that is now really what our main business revolves around, facilitating farming family meetings throughout the UK and Ireland. However, Shan also has a basic coaching qualification and has learned to deal with people in difficult situations, but also difficult people. And that is what brings Shan here this evening to deliver this webinar. So without further ado, we'll get underway this evening and I'll hand over to Shan to take us underway.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's great to be here. Well, I'm at home, but it's great to be talking to somebody other than my neighbours, really. Okay, so our 14 and a half years I've been facilitating family business meetings throughout the UK and Ireland. And yeah, I've had some difficult conversations in that time. Some of them will probably make your hair stand on end. And so that's probably why I've been asked tonight, is that, you know, I've been used to coping with those difficult conversations and how to manage them. I have, obviously, because of COVID, I haven't been doing a lot of this lately, and so I'm feeling a bit rusty. So I hope I'll get through this anyway. So, okay, so let's, I have to talk in general terms because, I don't know, what sort of difficult conversations that you were thinking about, okay? They may be with staff, it may be with family, it may be with other people, suppliers, whatever. And so it has to be in the general term, okay? But that's the reason why we're having questions afterwards, because hopefully then they'll be more suited to your needs, okay? So I suppose the first thing is, when you have to have a difficult conversation, first thing I suppose to ask is, do you really need that conversation? What is the consequence of this conversation? What is the cost of having the conversation? And what is the cost of not having the conversation? And sort of sitting down and saying, right, okay, yeah, would it be better if I left it? Or is it better if I do actually sit down and talk about this? So that's the first thing really to think about. Do I really need to have this conversation? The next thing then you need to think about is, right, okay, what am I trying to get out of this conversation? So you need absolute clarity on the outcome you want from that conversation. What is its purpose? Is it to reprimand somebody? Is it to sack somebody? Is it to try and understand somebody? So really sit down and think about what do you actually want out of that conversation? Really important. The next thing then to think about is how long you're going to allocate for this conversation and this meeting. I would say definitely allocate a lot more time than you think you're going to need. Because there's nothing worse. I mean, as I say, I facilitate family meetings, and there is nothing worse than being under time constraints. You tend to rush things, you tend to skip over things that you shouldn't. And so always allow a lot more time than you think you're going to need. Okay, if you finish early, that's fine. But there's nothing worse than being pressed for time. So make sure you give plenty of time to this conversation that you're going to have. The next thing to think about then is, where are you going to have this conversation? Where are you going to have this meeting? When I talk to families, again, I suggest a neutral venue. The reason for that is then that everybody is on the same footing. So if you're meeting several people and, you don't want one person to be at an advantage to others, or one person to be at a disadvantage. So making sure that, the venue is suitable for what you want to do. And also that you're not going to be interrupted. Really important, that if you're in the middle of something very important, you really don't want to be interrupted. So that means, nobody calling in. So make sure that people don't, knock on the door or whatever, and also turn your phone off, and that's just a matter of courtesy as well. Okay. The other thing then about thinking about it is, okay, you think about where you're going to have this meeting. Think about what sort of meeting it is. If you don't, this sounds crazy, this sounds a bit woo-woo, right? But if you don't want something confrontational, then you don't sit opposite people. Because if you're facing another person, it is actually confrontational. And if you don't want to be detached from someone, don't sit behind a desk. Because sitting behind a desk actually puts a distance between you and someone. And if you want a personal conversation, that's not a good idea. You're already putting yourself on another level from somebody else. And as I say, if you're sitting opposite someone, it's much more confrontational. So maybe it's just sitting down in easy chairs, having a cup of coffee. Or even, sometimes it's much better, particularly I find with farm staff, if you're walking across a field, you can have these conversations and these meetings actually walking across a field, talking about something else as well. And it's much more relaxed and it takes a lot of pressure. And if you want somebody who is not very communicative to be able to talk to you, particularly if they're farm staff, they're far more likely to talk to you as you're walking across a field than they are if you sit them in an office. The other one is actually sitting in a car, going on a car journey. I mean, we all know that with families, how you sit in a car and you have great conversations that possibly you wouldn't have at other times. So, think carefully about where you want to have this conversation and plan for that. The other preparation you need to do before this meeting or this conversation is check your facts. If you've say somebody has been one of your members of staff has been doing something that they shouldn't have, make sure you are you have the actual facts and the reality of the situation, because you don't want to go charging in with something and find that actually you're wrong. So make sure you're in control of all the facts as they should be. Having said that, don't base things on assumptions. It's interesting, whenever I go into a family meeting, family members called me up beforehand and all that. And whenever I've sort of thought, oh yeah, I know what this meeting is going to be like, I've never been right. In 14 and a half years, I have never been right. There's always going to be something that comes up that surprises you. And so don't base your meeting on assumptions, and be prepared for your assumptions to be challenged. You may have this opinion of the situation or the person, but that may be changed. And be prepared for that, and that is important to be able to do that as well. And also then, if you're having a meeting with someone, think about whether they should be prepared for the meeting as well. People don't like things being sort of dumped on them. And there are certain types of people who would not cope with that at all, because they need to think things through beforehand. So make sure that the person you're having the meeting with, or the people you're having the meeting with, are clear about what the meeting is going to be about, and tell them about it in good time. Okay, so those are the preparations for having this meeting or this conversation. And it's really important to go through those things so that you're setting yourself up for success right from the word go. So the next area I'm going to talk about is communication. Obviously, this is all about communication, And I think the first thing that we all need to know is we need to understand what our type of communication set is. Now, you can do all these sort of surveys, I suppose they're called, or sort of filling in lots of forms about what type of communicator you are. It's not really your personality type, it's the way you communicate or the way you come across to other people. It's really quite important. Now, before I did this job, I'd come across this sort of stuff, and I sort of put as much emphasis on it as I would for the the sort of horoscope in the weekly newspaper. But since I was trained in Australia and since I've been doing this job, I've realised that it's really important and it's really relevant, and it's actually a bit of a laugh doing it. And also, you know, you would be surprised at what comes out. And so what I do, and actually I can send this on to you afterwards if you like, I have a sort of questionnaire, and it's the DISC model. And there are lots of models. There's the DOPE model, the DISC model, there's Myers-Briggs, and there's some very, very complicated things about trying to sort of evaluate what your communication style is. Mine's very simple, you know, simple person, you know, okay. So it's just one side of A4. I can send it on if you wish, and there'll be an explanation of the types of communicators you are and how you need to adapt your communication style to deal with other people. Because you need to understand how you come across to other people, and also have an inkling about the sort of person that you're dealing with as well. Now, this is really important. I'll give you an example of this. I actually did a family meeting in July. I haven't done many this year, obviously, because of COVID, but this one was quite an urgent one. And I ended up going to this family, and it was very interesting because the mother and father were the people who'd set up the farm, and it was the mother who was the absolute dynamic person, tremendous. You know, she'd set up so many things with this farm. It was amazing, right? And her daughter, she had a daughter, they had a daughter, and she was a vet. She worked a little bit on the farm, but her husband, the son-in-law, he was the farmer, and he was now on the farm as well as the mother-in-law. And the problem, and what the issue was with them, is they were given the opportunity to buy the farm. They were renting the farm. They were given the opportunity to buy the farm, but they wanted a meeting because mother-in-law and son-in-law found it very difficult to get on. And mother-in-law was saying, I feel bullied. You know, I find you quite aggressive. And the son-in-law was saying, well, I'm not aggressive at all. I'm just frustrated because you're promising you're going to do things and you're not doing them and all this. And so we chatted through, and other members of the family said to the son-in-law, actually, you come across as very aggressive. And he was really shocked now that, and he said, well, no, I don't mean to be. And they were saying, well, that's how you come across to other people. And so he really sat down and he thought, well, and he apologized to his mother-in-law, and he said, I didn't realize that that was how I was coming across to you. I didn't mean it that way. And it was amazing because it actually transformed the whole conversation, because all of a sudden he was saying, you know, he'd apologized, and he was saying, you know, I was just through frustration, but I didn't realize it was affecting you. And so just one thing like that makes such a difference. And then, of course, the mother-in-law was saying, well, yeah, fine, we'll get on with things now. And so, you know, it transforms that conversation. So understanding how you come across to other people, and also it's not, okay, I'm this type of person and I'm never going to change. That's wrong as well. What it is, this is how I come across to other people. This is what I prefer. This is my preference in how I communicate. But if I want to get on with other people, I have to adapt my communication style to get on with other people. You know, because in a personal way, I remember, well, distinctly when I started doing this, you know, there was one person I knew, and I really couldn't get on with this person, really couldn't get on, didn't understand why. Once I did this, all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, I understand now why I don't get on with this person. And ever since then, I've gone fine, because I've been able to adapt my communication style to suit that person. So yeah, I can pass that disc on to you. Some of you may have done this already, and you know, it's always a good laugh as well, especially when you do it with the family as well. But I'll talk a little bit about some of the sort of big picture stuff of this. So, for instance, there are two types of people in some ways that are important to remember. Those are extroverts and introverts. And they think and communicate differently. Now, if you're dealing with an introvert, and you're talking with them, you have to get used to silences, because introverts process information in their heads. And they don't talk about it, they need to process it in their heads. And if you keep talking to them, you're interrupting their thought processes, and you're never going to get an answer out of them. So when you ask them a question, you've got to sit there and shut up and get used to that silence until they come back to you after they've processed that information. So as I say, with somebody who's introverted, you need to give them time to think things through in their heads before they will reply to you. Very important. And the opposite is the extrovert. Now, extroverts have to talk through things. And so you have to be quite patient with them, because they go gabbling on about stuff, but they need to process that information by talking it through. And so there's a different, so again, you know, that's one way that of understanding how you need to be dealing with different people. So with an introvert, you have to get used to silence. With an extrovert, bit of patience, because they have to chat through and they'll talk forever. Other types of people you may need to think about are details people and big picture people. Now, people who like details, if you've got somebody and you're preparing for a meeting with them and they are details people, you need your facts before you start, because they will not trust you at all. They will, you know, they will not get on with you at all if you don't have the details and the facts and figures, because that's how they survive and that's how they make decisions and that's how they communicate. So if, you know, if you're not a details person, you need to be changing and adapting to be able to provide details for these people in this meeting, because they will want those details. And then the other side of that is the big picture people. You know, they're not interested in detail at all. But if you need to be giving them information, make sure you don't give them reams of detail, because they, you know, you'll have lost them after 2 minutes. What you need to do is think, right, okay, what are the really important things that I need to get across to this person, and just say, right, okay, these are the 2 or 3 things that I need to get across, and we can leave the rest, because they ain't going to be listening. They're not going to engage. Okay, so those are just 2 sort of areas of things that you can think about, you know, when you're communicating with different people. And again, you have to adapt your communication style to suit other people. So that's a bit about the communication side of it. We're going to talk a bit more about that later on. But the next thing then is questions. You may need to think about questions beforehand. The best questions are open questions. And those are the questions you ask that don't have a yes or no answer. Particularly if you've got people who are not very communicative or feeling uncomfortable, you know, just getting yes or no out of them isn't going to help. And so you need to think about good open questions. So questions that start with what, why, when, where, how, or who. Those are the open questions. So that, you know, and maybe, you know, if you have got the opportunity to sort of prepare a few questions beforehand, it's a good idea to do that. If you've got somebody who's coming to you, like when you're dealing with staff members or people that you work with, and they're always coming to you for solutions, and you're getting a bit fed up with this and you want them to come up, or they're coming to you with issues and problems all the time, you need for them to find the solution, because if you give them the solution, they're always going to be coming to you. So it's a good idea to be able to ask questions to get them to come up with solutions for themselves. There's a saying that says the brain that holds the problem holds the solution. And so anything that you come up with as a solution wouldn't be as good as the person who's got the problem. So asking good questions to get other people thinking is really good in a difficult conversation. You know, get them to understand other people's points of view, get them to understand your point of view, get them thinking. That's the purpose of really good questions. It's also, you know, if you have good questions, you get clarity as well. So you understand the situation you're dealing with and you're trying to understand that person and where they're coming from. So questions are incredibly important. And it's a good idea to practice asking questions, you know, practice with your own family, or when you meet people. Okay, we're not meeting too many people at the moment, but when you're meeting people, and well, practice asking really good questions. And the better you do, you know, the more you do it, the better you get at it. I promise you, you know, I promise you for that. The other thing also, if you've got an issue with someone and you're not sure what it is, if you ask them what the problem is, usually the first answer you get is not the real issue. That's what I found in families, you know, whereas, you know, say if dad's being particularly awkward and you sort of ask him, you know, what is the issue? What's the problem with you? And he'll give you an answer and it won't be the real issue. You have to keep digging. You have to keep digging until the real issue comes out. And so that also is, you know, something that you need to remember is if there's a problem, the first thing they come up with is probably not the real problem. There's probably something behind that as well. Okay, another bit of communication, the most important, the magic bullet, listen. We all think we listen, but actually we're not very good at it. And listening is a real skill, and it is absolutely crucial. I've gone into so many family meetings where there have been members of the family who have been really awkward, not engaging with any sort of conversation, not wanting to give way on anything. And the reason is because they feel they haven't been listened to and they haven't been understood. And so listening is the magic bullet, because we all need to feel that we've been understood. And it is amazing. I've seen this over the years now. Once someone has been listened to and they feel they've been understood, they are then much more likely to engage in a conversation. They're much more likely to, to look for solutions and not to be so damned awkward. So listening to people is the silver bullet. It absolutely is. So it's crucial. First thing you must do, remember, is never interrupt someone. That's rude, As I said earlier, get used to silence. If you ask somebody a question, don't then keep on asking it. If you ask a question, they must be the next person who speaks. Because otherwise, if you speak again, then you've taken them off the hook, if you like. So when you ask a question, you must sit there and wait for that answer. So you really have to get used to silences. I know it's quite uncomfortable. I felt that certainly when I started this job, but I've got used to it now. So you do get used to it. There's a saying which is really good, and that is, we should listen to understand and not listen to reply. And I think that's what we often do in sort of most situations, is we're listening and we're thinking then about, right, okay, what are we going to say next? You shouldn't be. You should be listening to understand. So that's a really important thing. Be prepared for surprises. Have your assumptions challenged. That's fine. Be prepared for those surprises. But if somebody tries to get you off the subject, make sure you keep focused. What I said in the beginning, have clarity of what you want in the outcome of that conversation, and keep focused, because sometimes people will try and blow you off course. So make sure they don't. Keep focused on what you want to do. If you're criticizing somebody, now this is actually scientifically proven. There's some university in America that's proven this. If you're criticizing somebody, and you have a negative view, for every negative comment you make, you should make 5 positive ones. Now, this isn't me making it up. This is actually scientifically proven in some university in America. And so be very careful if you're criticizing people. Make sure that you also praise them, and you have to praise them a lot to sort of balance out that one critical comment. That's just science, okay? The other thing I think to do is, and it's something we tend not to do, and that is to trust our instincts. If you think, oh God, hang on, there's something odd there. Somebody says something and you think, that's a strange thing to say, or why did they do that? Trust your instincts, because that might be where the issue is. And sometimes, people will sort of say something and they're trying to avoid the real issue. So trust your instincts, be authentic, and say, right, okay, that was a strange thing to say there. I need to ask a question about it, because that's probably where the underlying issue may be. And don't try and avoid it. Don't be too scared about asking, because that's where maybe the critical solution for your conversation might be. You also have to be very authentic. Don't try and bullshit people. We all have this bullshit monitor in our heads. Do not try and bullshit people. You have to be authentic. You have to be sincere. Otherwise, you've lost it. You've lost it. So be authentic, be sincere. Very, very important. Okay, so the next thing is,
Shan, if I just could I maybe just ask? There's just a couple of points. Well, one is more maybe a comment from one of the participants, but it might be of interest to others, is that they find that, on your point about the open questions, something that helps stick with them in their head is TED. So tell me, explain, describe is something that they kind of keep in their head.
Excellent. Yeah, that is really good. Yeah.
And also just a small question on the 5 positive things against 1 criticism. When having these conversations, should you start with the positives and start with the good news, come to the bad, or should it kind of should your positives and your good points slot in throughout the conversation?
I think probably start with the good, because And I would say probably put the criticism in the middle, because we remember what happens at the beginning and we remember what happens at the end, much more. And so, but making sure that that criticism is clear. If you're criticizing somebody, you have to be absolutely clear that that this is unacceptable, and and you need to talk it through. But yeah, it's important. We don't appreciate people enough, particularly family members, actually, or we don't appreciate people enough. And appreciation means so much to all of us. And as I said, this is scientifically proven. I can't remember, I got a book here somewhere on it. But this 5-to-1. I first heard them. I thought, hells, that sounds a lot. But actually, proven that is, because we all tend to think, it's like. Say you've done something and people are commenting afterwards and they say, oh, it's great and it was wonderful, and one person says that was rubbish, that's the one you remember. And so it's really important that people are praised for what they do. And again, it's got to be sincere. It has to be sincere. Don't bullshit people because we've got this monitor on their heads and we realize what when that's happening. Anything else?
No, that's everything for the moment, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Right, okay, the next bit that I'm going to go on to is feelings. Now, you've got to be prepared for people to be very upset, very angry, those sort of areas. And you have to get used to doing it. Now, yeah, I was, before I was trained for this, I used to get really embarrassed and frightened when people were angry with me, and very embarrassed when people cried. But I got used to it. And I think you have to accept that maybe that might happen. Somebody may cry down, may burst into tears in front of you. Somebody may get extremely angry. Now, the first thing to remember is you must allow them to do it. Because if you say, oh, there's no need to cry, you're making their feelings invalid. And that upsets people. That makes it worse. Or there's no need to get angry. He is bloody angry, and he feels that he has the right to be angry. And so you saying, oh, there's no need to be, is invalidating their feelings, and that's wrong. And so never ever do that. Allow them to do it. So if people are going to cry or they're going to get extremely angry, if somebody cries and it's quite difficult, it's quite difficult to deal with. First of all, sit there and say, right, okay, do you want me to give you a minute, just to get over it? And just pause for a minute, let them get over it, and carry on. You're going to be quite careful. Some people, particularly women, I have to say, I'm sorry about this, but women sometimes use tears as a weapon. And so you've got to make sure that those tears are sincere, and so just give them a minute, but then you make sure that they realize no matter how much they cry, you're going to carry on. Okay. I have gone into family meetings where some women do use tears as a weapon, because that if the conversation is getting a bit uncomfortable, they cry, and then people say, oh, look what you've done now, and we stop the conversation. That ain't gonna happen. Okay, that doesn't happen with me anyway. And so, I get to the stage sometimes when I say, okay, here's a tissue, but we're carrying on. Okay, so be prepared for people to cry, and but as I say, give them a minute, but then carry on. If they're angry, you've got to give them time. Now, what you must remember is, if somebody is very angry, they won't hear you. You can say what you like, but they'll be extremely angry and they won't really hear you, and they won't be thinking well either. And so you have to allow them to go through it. And so one of the things I was taught when somebody is very angry is to repeat a phrase to them. Like, for instance, what do you want from me at this minute? Or what's made you angry? If you repeat something, it actually gets into their brain after a while. But remember that they're not hearing you properly and they're not going to be reasonable. So forget about it. So just let them get angry and then let them get over it. So maybe again, it's, okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we carry on. Okay, but be prepared for feelings, and never sort of say they're invalid, because people feel, and that's the way it is. But you have to learn to deal with it. Okay. The other area I suppose we need to look at is sort of unhelpful communications within businesses. Now, I was thinking of putting this up on a chart, but it's just quite simple. It's a thing called Cartmans Triangle. Now, if you don't recognize this, you're blind, or you're not very observant, because this Cartman Triangle happens in all families and all businesses, and it's a very, very destructive thing. So if you imagine a triangle, And at the top, you've got the persecutor. On one bottom corner, you've got the victim, and on the other bottom corner, you've got the rescuer. And these roles can change, but often in a team working on a farm or in a family, you've got somebody who's persecuting a victim. I can actually send this info on to you as well if you want. So what you've got, so I'll give you an example. Say on a family farm, you may have dad and son are persecutor and victim. Sometimes they can change positions, but they're at each other all the time. And often mum is the rescuer. So you've got this story, you know the scenario. Dad comes in for breakfast one morning to mother. That bloody boy didn't get up again this morning. We were supposed to be starting milking at 6 o'clock and he never turned up in the parlour till 7 o'clock. He out in the damn beer again. Then he goes out. Son comes in to poor old mum then. Oh, Dad's on my back again. The car broke down last night, or I was up last night calving a cow and I overslept because I was up for 2 or 3 hours in the night. Never understands me. And so mum goes out then and explains to dad, and then mum talks to the son and says, oh, you've got to understand dad was tired, blah, blah, blah. And she's rescuing them all the time. Now, it's a very destructive thing to happen. And the person who has the power within this triangle is the rescuer. The problem is the rescuer often gets their self-esteem from being the rescuer, because they say, if it wasn't for me, this family would fall apart. And this happens also with staff and everything like that as well. And so you've got to be aware of, and if you are a rescuer, you've got to step out, because the way to stop this triangle is for the rescuer to step out of it and say to the persecutor and the victim, the father and the son, don't bother talking to me. I can't do anything about it. You have to talk to each other. Because that's the problem. They're not talking to each other. They're talking through somebody else. And it's like Chinese whispers. And the longer this goes on, the worse it gets. Because sometimes I say to people, you're the rescuer. You need to step out of this. Oh, my God, if I do that, place is going to fall apart. There's going to be a hell of a row. Yeah, there probably will be a hell of a row. But the longer you leave it, the worse it's going to get, because it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because those two people, the persecutor and the victim, are not speaking properly to each other. They're just yelling to each other. And so that is something that I see all the time. It's very interesting, when you go into the businesses and things, to see that. But yeah, it's there all the time. So be aware of that. If you've got a team of staff or something like that, look out for that and try and stop it. But, and make sure that people are communicating with each other, not through somebody else. So that's really quite an important one. The other one you have to sort of look at is if people start behaving childishly or they start behaving like a bossy parent. You have to keep conversations on an adult to adult level, because that's where people communicate most effectively. And if you start wagging a finger at somebody and saying, you shouldn't do that, as if you're, a sort of critical parent, the person you're dealing with is more likely to become childish, and misbehave. And so it's very important whenever you have these conversations to not be overcritical, not to be a parent, or even a parent, the parent-like person to say, oh, well, I'll help you and all this. No, you have to be adult to adult. And this is why I find in families it's very difficult, particularly for fathers and sons to actually get on together, because they still see that each other as parent and child. And to be able to talk together as business associates, they have to communicate as adults. And so if somebody else sort of starts being either behaving like a parent or behaving like a child, you have to stop that by behaving like the adult and being the sort of reasonable adult person, because that again is a very destructive thing to deal with. Okay, the other thing I suppose you need to talk about is, if you do have problems in staff, say you're working on a farm, it could be family, it could be staff. I always say to people, it's really important to have regular operational meetings, because this prevents problems in families and in businesses. Now, people think, oh, I'm on a farm, I see so-and-so every morning. That's not the point. You need to be sitting down once a week, once a fortnight, need only be for half an hour. and say, right, okay, you know, what did we do in the last 2 weeks? What went well? What didn't go so well? What are we going to be doing in the next 2 weeks? Who's responsible for what? And so you've got this ongoing conversation going, which actually is very much better communication within a business. You are running a business. Other businesses have business meetings. Okay, you don't want to, you know, waste your time. That's why I say have a start time, but also have an end time. You know, it might be only 15 minutes. But it's just so important to take time out of the day to plan for things, and so that everybody knows what's going on. And so that's important that after the meeting then, you know, if you're saying, right, okay, we're doing this, this and this, you allocate the jobs to people. And, you know, you may sort of say, right, okay, it's going to be on a WhatsApp or something like that. So people have got it in front of them. So there's none of, oh, you said you were going to do that. Oh, I thought you said you were going to do it. You know, it's actually in writing. So communication within the business and having ongoing operational meetings is incredibly important for stopping arguments and, you know, having a proper forum for airing concerns and, you know, gripes as well, you know, and so, and getting things sorted out and nipping things in the bud before they get too awkward. So those are operational meetings within a business. Okay, so say you've had this awkward conversation, because that was a little bit of an aside there, but say you've had this awkward conversation now, and you want to finish this conversation, this meeting you've had. The first thing to do is show appreciation to the person you've talked to. You know, they've been there, they've explained things to you, they might have been awkward, but genuine appreciation for them engaging with you in that conversation. As again, genuine, okay? The other thing is then, like I said, with the operational meetings, at the end of the meeting, there may be actions. Now, when I run a family meeting, I have a flip chart and I have an action plan on it. And I write on a flip chart so that everybody can see it. So I'm not writing on a piece of paper on a desk and nobody can see it. Everybody sees it in black and white in front of them. That's something you may need to consider, particularly if you're talking to more than one person, okay? So that everybody can see it in black and white. And the action plan should be, right, these are the things we're going to do. Not only that, who's going to do it, and put a deadline on it as well, a date. Really important, because you can have great meetings and go out and then people forget what they were supposed to do, and they, you know, and there's no deadline, they don't get it done. And so having an action plan of what the result of that meeting is and who's going to do what and by when, absolute clarity about the result of that meeting. And again, you may choose to use something like WhatsApp or just a message on the phone or an email or something with clarity about what is expected to have been done as a result of that meeting, who's supposed to do it, and by when. And also, if you need to revisit, if this issue needs to be revisited in the future, putting a date in the diary and saying, right, okay, we will be having another meeting in 2 months' time to make sure that, you know, things have improved. You know, so say if somebody keeps on coming in late, and you're saying, right, okay, you know, we'll see how you go now for the next 2 months, and, you know, in 2 months' time, we will sit down and have another meeting. We'll have a review to see how it's going. The other thing you need to do when you have these actions is the consequences of what happens if they don't happen. You know, so if for instance, if somebody is continually late all the time, and you say, right, okay, you know, we're going to see how you go for the next 2 months. And if you are still carrying on being late, you're going to be sacked or whatever. So give them the consequences of not doing the actions so that they understand, you know, okay, if I don't do that, this is what's going to happen. Okay, so really important. And so that is pretty much the end of the conversation then, hopefully. Except I think once the conversation is ended, I think it's very good for you as the person who's been running that conversation to reflect on it. Because if you want to improve your communication, if you want to improve how you get on with people, if you want to improve how you motivate people and all that, then you need to reflect on it. And I was taught how to do this when I was trained. And so the first thing I asked myself is, did I do my best? Because, you know, sometimes you come out of meetings and you think, oh my God, you know, I'm not happy about that as well. But if you sort of say, right, okay, did I do my best? Did I really try my best, you know? And if you did your best, there's nothing anybody, you know, nobody can criticize you really because you've done the best you could. But then the 3 questions I asked myself are, what went well in that meeting? So the first thing is a positive thing. what went well, and write a couple of things down. You know, that went well, I did this well, the venue worked well, you know, that sort of thing. What didn't go so well? Okay, right, that could have done better. I could, you know, that wasn't so good. And then what would you do to improve it? So what went well, what didn't go so well, and what would you do differently next time? What could you do to improve it? What, you know, what will you do differently? And so then you are using a reflection to be able to improve the way that you are holding these conversations and the way that you're communicating as well. So that's pretty much it. I'm hoping that we'll have some sort of engagement with questions, because, as I said, it's very broad brush. It is very broad brush, and there are so many different scenarios that you can have. You know, it's with family members, it may be with staff, it may be with, oh gosh, I don't know, suppliers, anything like that. And so, if you could, give me examples of what you want to talk about, that would be fantastic. I suppose what I finish off with in this section then is a quotation which I came across this week actually, and I thought was really good. And it's from Stephen Hawking. And he said, "Mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking, and its greatest failures by not talking." So it's really important. Okay, so are there any questions?
Thanks, Shan. Yep, we have had quite a few come through, so I'll just work through these in the order. So the first one would be, what would you do if there's a conflict between two staff members? So the farmer or the manager maybe gets on well with both, but those two workers are always clashing.
Yeah, I think you probably, it would be up to you to judge them whether you want to talk to them as individuals first or talk to them together. Because you may not want to talk to them as individuals first, but then I would definitely have them sitting together, because if one of them's lying, the other one's going to say so, so having the two of them there together means, right, okay, you're going to hear all sides of the story. It's also important for them. So what I would do is I would have them probably in, somewhere where you manage the conversation. Don't allow them to talk to each other. What you do, you talk to them. Okay, and you mustn't allow the other one to interrupt or do anything. You talk to one person and say, right, okay, what is the issue for you? And it doesn't matter if this person's going, oh, I know this. Don't allow the other one to interrupt. So they explain the issue and how they're feeling about it and their side of it. Then you ask the other person. Don't allow them to say, oh, well, he said this and he said that. No, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear what your side of the situation is. And hopefully between the two of them, there'll be a bit of clarity about what is actually going on. And usually it's a misunderstanding between them, or it's an assumption. One is making an assumption of the other. You have to decide then, are they going to be able to get on together? You have to sort of say, right, okay, can we talk this through? And you say to each of them then, what needs to happen to make, this better? What needs to happen to make this situation better? And and I suppose, you've got to get them to come up with solutions. They must come up with the solutions, not you. Don't ever put solutions on them. Make them come up with the solutions of how they are going to get over it. And also then give them the consequences of, right, okay, if you don't start getting on with each other, these are the consequences. So as I say, talk to them individually, have them there together, but talk to them and don't allow them to interrupt, but let them come up with the solutions. That, because it has to be them, not you. Okay?
Yeah, no, that's excellent, thank you. Second question then is, it comes back to the 1 negative, 5 positive aspect, and it is, what would you suggest when there are quite a lot of negatives and it's rather difficult to come up with 25 positive aspects?
Yeah, I think you've got to sort of, don't overload people with things. If there are a lot of negatives, right, okay, let's deal with the worst tool, the best tool or something like that. I mean, I'm not going to be sort of religious about this, but, I'm saying, right, you have to come up with 10 or whatever, but make sure that you show that there's some sort of appreciation, even if something small, like, well, you always turn up on time, you crap when you're here, but you actually turn up on time, that's a positive. And try and just deal with the most important first. But again, try and understand why they're doing this. And if they're that flipping negative, you've also got to sit down and think, well, actually, should I be employing this person in the first place? So that's a question for yourself to deal with as well. Okay, give them an opportunity, and if there are, as I say, don't tackle all the negatives, but tackle the worst ones to start and see if you go from there. And be clear in your mind that if things don't change with that person, and there are an awful lot of negatives, then it's very difficult if it's a family member. But you've then got to sort of say, right, okay, these are the consequences for not changing.
Okay, yep, thank you. Another question then that came in was, how do you deal with the staff member who blames everyone else?
Oh God, yeah. I think again, it's get everybody in round the table and sort of point, and get everybody to be saying, so it's not, you're not just dealing with that one person, and it's not just you and them, it's all the other staff as well, and saying, like, these are the issues, and give examples of this, and then say to this person, and I think what you've got to be careful about is, why are they doing that? Are you creating, or maybe your staff creating an atmosphere where it's bad to make a mistake? If people are being blamed for things, and if when things go wrong, people are being overly criticized and things like that, then maybe the atmosphere there is wrong anyway. And we all make mistakes, and so have a look at the atmosphere there with the whole team and say, right, okay, look, we all make mistakes, and it's far better to own up to them and do something about it. So maybe you need to be changing the whole atmosphere there, but do it as a whole team, not just you two, because it's just their word against yours then. Whereas if everybody's saying, look, it wasn't my fault, it was him, and all that. So yeah, work as a team together and sort of say, right, okay, how can we change the atmosphere there so people feel, and encourage people to say, right, okay, I appreciate it when you say you've done something wrong. I appreciate it. I'd rather know than hear it from somebody else. And so maybe it's a whole culture thing that you need to change within the team. And so maybe getting the whole team on board and saying, right, okay, we're going to change the culture here where it's okay to make a mistake as long as you admit it. Okay.
Okay, yep. So just actually a follow-up question sort of to what we've just been, that last question that we've been discussing, is the problem that's behind the question. It seems to be more that the staff members are currently just passing the buck one between the other. Would you have any tips in that situation?
Yeah, I think again, it's set them down and say, right, okay, what the hell is going on here? Get them to tell the story and say, this is acceptable. It just is not acceptable. And, we cannot, and really lay it on the line and say, look, we cannot cope with this until things are sorted out properly. And so really get down to the issue and make sure that you are performing the actions you want to see. Because if you are a leader within a business, you have to walk the talk. You have to, walk the talk. And so if you're passing the buck, they're going to do it as well. So very much, sometimes we need to sit down and look very carefully at what our attitude is and what we're doing as well. And so we need to be authentic, and we need to be demonstrating the behaviors that we want to see with our staff. And so if something goes wrong and you do it, then you hold your hand up. So you are the sort of the image for what you want to promote within the staff. But again, sit them down and say, right, this is not acceptable. I want to hear what you're not going to be punished for what goes wrong, but we need to understand what's going on here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. That's that one answered. So another one then, what do you do if someone storms out of a meeting?
Yeah, that's why it's a good idea sometimes to have a neutral venue, because you can lock the blighters in. But because this is what happens in some family meetings is, I say, I don't want on the farm because Dad, if he's in a bad mood, he'll just walk out and say, I'm going to feed the calves or something like that, but they can't if you're in a hotel room or something. I have had people storm out of a meeting, and what you do is you sort of go out after them and say, you know, look, if you, this is an opportunity to talk about it now. If we don't talk about it now, it's not going to be settled. There are consequences for not talking this through. And so, you know, again, it's being absolutely clear on the consequences of not talking things through properly, you know. And you know, that could be, you know, if it's a staff member, you know, you're disciplined or you're even sacked. If it's a family member, you know, and they're refusing to talk about something, or they're walking out, then you have to say, well, right, okay, you know, these are the consequences. Am I going to be remaining in this business for much longer? And that is a sad thing that I come across in families, is where families fall out, and you know, and there are family members who refuse to engage in a conversation. And I have to say, it's usually the younger person actually who's at the brunt of this. And you know, the parents are not willing to talk about certain things, and you have to talk to the younger person and say, look, in the end, it's your choice. You put up or shut up, or you walk away. You know. And so so you need to be absolutely clear with people if they walk out of a meeting what the consequences are going to be of that, because if it's something that needs to be sorted out, you need to sort it out.
Thank you very much, Sham, for a really interesting and informative session. I think it's safe to say we'll all go away with some tips and some things to think about going forward with these questions. And it was great to see all our attendees there getting so engaged and given some particular questions and situations that they're struggling with as well.